Everyone, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be the beginning of my end of the year series where I talk about the best, the worst, the most disappointing, and today the most surprising books that I've read in 2023. Everything will be linked in the description box whenever the videos are up, and I'm very excited. Hopefully you are too. Today, like I said, the most surprising books that I've read. So books that I went into them often with low expectations and they just surprise me. Sometimes it's new genres that I've really been enjoying, things that I'm figuring out patterns and that I want to find more recommendations. Feel free to add some in the comment section. Let's just get into it. The first one, I ended up enjoying so much more than I expected. My Best Friend Exorcism. And this was my first book by the author. I was dreading it because I thought it was going to be very similar to Rally Sager, which I don't like. But like, to be fair, look, the Final Girl support group and like Final Girls, are they not super similar? Fortunately for me, not the same vibes, at least from that one book. It is horror, but I feel like it's making fun of the genre, old school horror, not that I'm really familiar with it. And even though you are following main female characters, with the way they're written, not that they're written that deeply, you still get teenage girls without making fun of teenage girls, so that passed the vibe check, and I ended up really enjoying it. It does become quite intense towards the end. I don't want to spoil anything, but feel free to ask me in the comment section and I'll spoil everything. But yes, a few sections were horrifying, a few of them were kind of funny because they were so but it worked, and I ended up giving it like 4 stars. It was great. I can totally see a lot of people also enjoying it, so I get the hype behind this one. And this cover, I think this is going to be my best cover of the year. I have to double check. I'll do an award video very soon, but this is really cool. Very, like, again, classic horror, and it makes me more hopeful that I don't hate all of One of the subgenres I've been really discovering a love for is like cozy fantasy, modern, like witches kind of vibes. It's so hard to find cozy fantasy in general that work. Like, you have to find a balance of being, yes, cozy and not much happens, but still interesting. And I was really pleasantly surprised by In the Company of Witches. This is set in a small town and you're following a female character. She works at this bed and breakfast with her 2 aunts. They're witches. So you kind of get like Sabrina. What is it in English? L'Apprenti Sorcière. The Teenage Witch, I think that's the English version. Either way, maybe a bit Gilmore Girls because, again, B&B, it's a bit of a stretch, but still, I really enjoyed myself, like the characters. It is heavier than any of those comparisons because the big theme of the book is grief, but I still thought it was fun. It is a murder mystery, which again works for me in small towns. Essentially, the one client that they had at the bed and breakfast was found, and one aunt might have been overheard saying that she wished her. So obviously small town, witchy vibes, of course they're gonna think she did it. And yeah, I enjoyed it so much so that I requested the second book from the library and they got it. So it's gonna be one of my first read of 2024. A lot of you actually told me that you did pick it up and you enjoyed it even more. Cross all of your fingers that I will too, and yeah, pleasantly surprised, would recommend. Obviously, again, do be warned, it is more serious than I'm making it sound because grief is a big part of the book, but it was fun and cozy to me because, again, small town witches, murder mystery. Because somehow that's cozy to me. Another subgenre that I've discovered that I personally really enjoy is high fantasy, but like a murder mystery set in a high fantasy world. Or just fantasy in general. I have 2 that I've discovered and I was pleasantly surprised with. The first one is The Master of Djinn. I have also read one of the novella and I have another one on my waiting list at the library, so I will get to it. It's a little bit historical fiction fantasy. It's set in 1912 in Cairo, and you're following a female character. She is definitely more progressive than everyone else. I don't think she labels herself, but there is a sapphic romance. She loves to dress in like male suits, like very colorful one, and in this book, the case is a mass event where a bunch of people, part of the brotherhood that they've created, trying to solve mysteries and like accumulate a bunch of stuff that isn't theirs, and she is sent there to try and help to figure it out. They have to work with also djinns, which I've read a couple books recently with them, and I think this is my favorite one. And I've also read, like I said, the novella, which was also good, and I want to read more from the author in general, but also from this world. It's mostly just novellas. This is the only book. You can read this as a standalone, and it was great. I enjoyed myself. Very satisfying ending. I have no complaints. I feel like often fantasy have been hit and miss for me, but this was great. I don't want to say much more because frankly, even though there's quite a bit of action, it's still quite character driven and I just enjoy the characters in general. That's why I'm really happy to read the novellas. I don't often do this, so I feel like it tells a lot, but this was good. Speaking of which, I also read City of Stairs, and kind of similarly, although this one is definitely like high fantasy, you have this world where there used to be gods, they kind of disappeared, and they were all responsible, all of them, for different magical elements, and some of them still works, which mean that they should still be alive, and some of them don't, which means they are not alive anymore, and you're following, again, a murder mystery investigation. That's why I'm saying that I feel like I really discovered something that works for me, that is different from everything else I've been reading, and I want to read more. Actually, this is the first book in a series, so I will be reading the rest. I already own them. I don't know why I didn't. I think I read this in like January or something, like really early during the year, and I'm terrible with series. But I'm hoping to get more of the magic system and the world building and try to figure out what actually happened, how things got to the point where they are in the beginning. But there's a lot of political intrigue that I'm hoping that will make more sense with the rest of the series. So I would highly recommend this. I feel like I used to see this book going around a little bit more, but I feel like it's a bit more underrated, and I'm hoping that reading the rest will make it worth it and it will be worth the little hype that it has. So this was great, pleasantly surprised. I am a big fan of First Contact with Aliens. I've read a ton and I've been trying to find some that are like different, not so much like pew pew just murdering everyone, but when I heard about this one, I saw this, read what it was about, I was like, this needs to come home with me, because Remnant Population, you're following a very old grumpy woman. And I wanted to say mostly very grumpy, not very old. This woman, she had it, okay? She is so done with people. She went through it. You kind of get eventually the backstory later on, but all you know is she's done. She wants to be left alone. She doesn't want to live with people anymore. She just wants to garden without wearing shoes or clothes, really. Mostly underwear, which, you know what? I get that. The planet that she's living on has to be evacuated. The people that bought it want everyone gone. And she decides that she's going to stay behind because, again, she wants to be the F alone. So would work out. And she gets to stay there for a while until First Contact with Aliens. That's all I'm gonna say. I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. If you enjoyed like grumpy, again, older characters, I feel like it's something that we see very often, but it tends to work for me. And this ended up being a bit more wholesome than I expected. I feel like, spoiler free, but I feel like the ending is a bit more wholesome than I expected, but it ended up working. I was pleasantly surprised. Very different from all the other First Contact with Aliens books that I've read. I did videos on the topic. If you have any recommendations, feel free because I love them. But yes, definitely tick the box of older female character. I'm tired of like following 16-year-old girl with like pretty magical eye color and hair color and super skinny. I don't want to read that anymore. And this was interesting and different. And yeah, she's definitely very grumpy though. Just be ready. When you get her backstory, I feel like it makes sense. Let's continue with the cozy fantasy books because again, this year was my year. I've been really finding some and trying to read some, and some of them are but Beware of Chicken. Definitely my most surprising book of the year for sure, because what was that? You're following this man who is probably from her world, and he is sent back in time in a version, like a magical version of old time, like China, like ancient China. And magic is a thing. He wakes up in the body of a monk, and so he has some magic, and he decides to pretty much escape from there, the monastery where he's learning to fight, because he wants to be, again, completely alone. Are we seeing a team here? And he decides to become a farmer, far away from everyone else, and he develops like a friendship with people from the closest village, and he's just busy learning, take care of the land. In theory, it doesn't sound like something that would appeal to me, but I really ended up enjoying the characters, again, watching their relationship. Do want to warn you, the humor is a little juvenile at times, just to give you an idea. He has a rooster and he's called Big D, so it does get better. I feel like in the beginning it was a bit much, but it gets better, and I just ended up being quite invested. It is a series. I believe 3 books are out, and I wasn't sure I was going to continue when I finished the first book, but I might actually, because again, I ended up enjoying them, like the characters and the story and everything, a lot more than I expected. So pleasantly surprised. If you're looking for more and something that you might have not heard of, I would check out Beware of Chicken. I really didn't expect this book to be here. Speaking of which, I wanted to give a quick shout out to How High We Go in the Dark. I can't say too much about this one because it's almost like a collection of like short stories that are all linked. It's like a post-apocalyptic book. Pandemic happened and people are going through it throughout the book, like you're advancing in time, but you're following so many different people and so many different like moments that I can't say too much. I will say though that the one with all the roller coasters, like the amusement park, slightly traumatized. But this was very character driven. It's just like watching the effects of this whole situation on a bunch of different characters. Some of them like are eventually linked, and I usually am not a huge fan of like shorter stories. I feel like often it's like a skeleton story, you're not emotionally invested, but I was. So I would recommend this one. Again, pleasantly surprised, very different. If you enjoy post-apocalyptic books or you're looking for something that you haven't read before, try this one. Also, North and South. I feel like we're balancing things out because there is one book that will make it to my most disappointing books. A classic book that will make it. So we're including one in my most surprising too, because this was good. I have been trying to read more classics, like a couple every year, and I don't want to only read some that were written by men. They're much easier to find, but this one I hadn't heard of, and I ended up really enjoying it because of the social commentary. A lot more than I expected. The whole like industrial movement, wasn't expecting all of that in the book. I thought this was a romance book, and the romance was by far my least favorite part of the book. I hated the romance, straight up. I removed a star from the book because of the romance. I was a bit, and by a bit I mean very much annoyed, but everything else was great. I enjoyed the writing. I feel like it's a common theme that we see these like main female characters stuck with her families. Like, she's the one emotionally taking care of everyone around her. Her father, is he a pastor? I can never remember. Anyway, he's part of the church. He decides that he doesn't really believe anymore, or he doesn't believe, you know, in the whole job that he has, and they end up being forced to go to town. Hopefully I remembered that correctly. I feel like I'm always mixing things up with that section, but they end up in town and it's awful, and they're just trying to survive. And yeah, it was really interesting to see the main female character. She was great as a character in general, and yeah, hated the romance, but I'm curious to see how you guys feel about that one, because I really thought I was going to read it like Pride and Prejudice and be really invested in the characters, and no. I liked her and some of the other things that happened, but definitely more for the social commentaries, not so much for the romance. Another one that took me by surprise is a YA book. I feel like I'm so over young adult books. Some of them are still good, but it's like one out of like, I don't know, 50 at this point for me. And this one is a romance, so I feel like, once again, shouldn't necessarily be my cup of tea, but this one was good. You guys were right. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, this one is set in Syria. You're following this young woman who was studying to become a pharmacist, and then the war happens and she's stuck trying to save people. She's spending every minute of every day in the hospital trying to essentially be a doctor, even though she's not. And then there's a romance that happens, and I ended up being a lot more invested than I thought I would be. I do want to say I listened to that one as an audiobook, and I feel like that was key for me. I'm not sure I would have been able to read the whole thing because, again, why? But this was really good. I completely understand the hype, and if you do enjoy these kind of books, you're gonna love this one. Like, Prepare to Kleenex, this was definitely very sad. And two more quick shout out. We have Nettle and Bone. I didn't think this was going to make it in my most surprising books of the year. This is an adult fantasy. I think people were debating if it was adult, but I think it's because even the main character, I believe she's like 30, she does read younger. I think that was a complaint I had heard, but I feel like if you think of the context, it makes sense. She's a princess, but she was extremely sheltered, and her sister is forced to go marry this prince that is essentially abusive, like think DV situation, and she goes on a mission to try and save her. It does give strong like fairy tale retelling kind of vibes, which makes it cozy. Don't come for me. I would categorize it as cozy, but that's my own brain, clearly. But I think a lot of you actually told me you felt the same, so not just me. Again, pleasantly surprised. I did listen to it as an audiobook, which also I do think that made me enjoy it more. But yes, I was pleasantly surprised. It went by quickly and made me really want to read more by the author. I did read another one actually, but that one would be like middle grade, which I'm going to try to read her other adult books to see if I enjoy them more. But this was pleasantly surprising. So, and last but not least, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Fina. This was a short book, like it was like 100 something pages, and the premise super interesting. You have this main character, they just ended a relationship with their partner. Unfortunately, they do work together essentially at IKEA, and she is forced to go to work with them because the person that was supposed to called sick, and she goes there. Awkward things. Love the setting. The humor of like working these kind of customer jobs really suck. Capitalism sucks. That's what you get in the beginning. The humor definitely worked for me, and then you find out that one client, a customer, disappeared, essentially wormhole. They end up in the diversion of her world, and since she is the most recent employee, because that could have been the guy that she's replacing that is sick, and she's the one that is forced to go because they cut the budget. The team that's supposed to do that doesn't exist anymore, so she is forced to go and do that. And really funny concept. I do feel like the action ended up being a bit long for me, but I was still invested enough that I'm now looking forward to reading book 2. A lot of you told me it's even better. Again, crossing my fingers that it will be the case for me. But yeah, the sense of humor definitely worked for me, so I will be checking out the second book because the concept is fun. The concept was definitely fun. Ooh, almost forgot. I wanted to give a quick shout out also to Can't Spell Treason Without T. This is another cozy fantasy where we're seeing the pattern here. You're following this guard who has fallen in love with this magician, and they escape because the queen really doesn't care for the people. Especially, again, the main female character you're following. She was attacked trying to prevent the queen from being. And the queen is like, okay, you should be up and going tomorrow morning. And she's just been injured, so she decides to escape. And they end up building this bookshop that also sells tea in a very remote place. And you're following them building it, making friends with the people from the small town. And I loved it, okay? Sapphic romance, attaching, kind of found family vibes, and I just have been really enjoying it. I believe there's a second book that just came out. I think it's Pirate something, and I will be reading more by the author because, again, apparently I'm a cozy girly now. Cozy fantasy girly specifically. So these are all the books that took me by surprise this year. I would love to hear yours, or if you have read any of the ones that I've mentioned, how you personally felt about them in the comment section. Definitely subscribe, thumbs up, because this series is just starting. I'll put more videos on the screen, and I will see you then. Bye.